I tried to make this city look European. The layout checks out, but the zoned
Bruh.
buildings don't. So today, I'm switching from the default zones to the region pack types. They're far more fitting, and they let me control density transitions much more cleanly. To keep things consistent and to keep an overview with the many zone types, I built simple zoning palettes, grouped by increasing density. Each group mixes styles that work well together, from low-density detached homes, semi-detached and row houses, all the way up to mixed-use and Oldtown buildings. Because rezoning takes time, I divided the city into areas where the palettes will be applied. Starting with the Oldtown, adjacent is the shopping district surrounded by the Midtown. The Ringroad and adjacent buildings are also in need of a distinct rezoning. The Riverside district differs from the other districts. Lastly, density in the Station district will be slightly lowered. As always in this series, I'll mix gameplay tips, real urban planning, and a bit of history along the way. Let's start with the Oldtown, and of course the very common thing is to have a church right in the middle, and this is the only custom asset that I'm using. I'm trying to just use vanilla plus the region packs and as few mods as possible. And one thing you already see is usually the spire would be the tallest building, especially with like these regional or small towns. But in this case, the surrounding buildings in the shopping street and the old town, they're even taller sometimes than the church spire, and they have like 6-7 floors. That is way too much. I'm struggling a bit with the placement here, but I found a nice spot where I can basically put a plaza in front of the church that merges into the like pedestrian street or pedestrian road intersection. So it gives a nice plaza style. And then this asset in particular, it has these pathways on the side, and I was trying out some more detailing. Nowadays, without mods even, we have the tree age toggle. So is it like a sapling or is it a fully grown tree? And I was playing around a bit with that, as well as the surfaces and networks. And the cool thing is, compared to Cities Skylines 1, that is all vanilla. Then I wanted to have medieval or old town buildings next to the church, and there's even a zone type for that. But one thing we have to keep in mind, and I'll link a video here as well, which is my European city guide. The farther back you go in the epochs, the smaller the plot sizes become for regular buildings. So here I'm going with very narrow buildings, very short, like 2 or 3 tile deep zones, and that is something, you know, the further you go along in the ages, in the epochs, the larger usually plot sizes and buildings get because of construction improvements. Also, another thing is that not only the buildings, but the blocks themselves were smaller. So I had to, you know, put in another pedestrian street right there. Compared to previous episodes, these also came in a patch, like the one-way pedestrian streets, which are way more narrow and way more realistic, you know, like a pedestrianized old town street compared to the wide shopping streets that we had previously. So that wasn't possible in earlier episodes either. Now this is where it gets finicky. I used the pedestrian path, not the pedestrian street, to break up the zoning grid and force the grid to basically recalculate. And I used the zoning toggle feature from the recent patch as well to kind of get these wall-to-wall buildings fit in whichever way possible. It is really tough to get that right in vanilla. Another thing that I remembered now in the voiceover, compared to, you know, me initially planning that layout, people were not stupid. Even in the Middle Ages and before that, there was a rough urban planning idea. There was zoning, like butchers had their own side streets and bakers as well because of pollution smell and hygiene, and for bakers it was fire hazard. So a rough idea of zoning existed, like people were not stupid. So why would they put randomly curved streets just because in a cliche it looks European? And I replicated that in the earlier episodes, and I kept on going. And nowadays, like looking back at it, I realized like I could have made it easier for myself for these wall-to-wall buildings if I just, kept the roads a little more straight, less curved. But anyways, the chance here is to at least put a park with the free placement tool, adjust the surfaces, which is just way more comfortable compared to Cities Skylines 1. So at least we got that going. There's some pluses, some minuses. So please ignore my ahistorical and weirdly curved streets. And what I'm basically doing right now is filling in little blocks bit by bit. Again, plot sizes are small, block sizes are small. And one thing I found out how to get the grids, the zoning grids to like spawn or adjust the way I want to is have one side of the street be zoned the way that you want it to be. And then when that is set, it basically like locks it in place. If you then put the pedestrian paths, it will then adjust all the other grids besides the ones you zoned. Usually or mostly that is. It's still finicky, but that's kind of the idea. And then you can zone the rest, remove the path, which sometimes allows for like a few more zones to spawn, and then basically fill that in. If you just put the path and then delete it again, the zone will reset. So you have to put some kind of buildings or like zones in the squares for them to lock in place. And the last thing that I was struggling with and having to keep in mind from a realism perspective as well as an in-game perspective is corner lots. Corner lots are super important in real life because it just means you have more frontage towards two streets or even more streets maybe. That means more people will see your building and have access to your building, especially for shops. And in game, there's another thing. Lot sizes are limited. Sometimes there is no 2x3 that spawns on a corner. Maybe there's just a 2x2. Not every zone type has every single footprint combination available. And a lot of the zones I use only have 2x2 corner lots or 3x3s. And especially for that Oldtown, the 3x3s might already be way too large. So I had to go with the 2x2s. Next up is the shopping street, and look at that building, like 2, 4, 6, 8 floors at least, plus like maybe 2 in the attic. That is way too large. So for these small town or regional town shopping streets in Europe, it's not just department stores. Usually it's actually people living in the upper floors and then just shops being in the lower floor or lower floors, maybe like the first 2. I had to remove a lot of the large buildings and I wanted to zone as few high density commercial as possible and stick with mixed use zones. And I mean, I have my zoning palettes available anyways, but it was still difficult to not have the buildings be too large, too similar, have variety, but at the same time have the wall-to-wall be realistic, but at the same time I wanted to have big malls as well. Filling in the blocks, removing some of the huge buildings, but keeping some. One thing that you shouldn't be afraid of in City Skylines is rezoning or redoing areas. I mean, it's very common in real-life urban planning as well, like redeveloping, rezoning, so why not do that in-game as well with even fewer consequences, basically. Now, compared to the Oldtown, the buildings here are a little larger, and we had the distinction here that some of the buildings are only accessible by pedestrian road, but others have frontage towards actual streets with parking and driving lanes. Like, which kind of buildings would rather be on a street and which one would be on a pedestrianized shopping street or a high street, basically what you would call in the UK or Fußgängerzone in Germany. And I know we mock the US for its insane use of parking lots. And I mean, the statistics do speak for themselves. Like, they have a lot of parking. But that doesn't mean that we don't have that in European cities, especially in the downtown. Like, people need to park somewhere, especially in these dense areas. So I was like, whenever I find an area that I have no idea what to do with, and the frontage is towards the street and not a pedestrian road, I'm just going to put a parking lot. And to be honest, I think the shopping district might be a bit too large. Like, I overdid it scaling wise, and it was such a pain to fill in. It was so tedious, it was so boring. So I'm just going to skip ahead and just show you a few nice plazas, a few nice malls that I built. And I even added the town hall as well, which is like a nice historical building from, I think, the French region pack. And I wanted to have the town hall close to the church in the Old Town. And, you know, that freed up a lot of space that I didn't have to zone, which I was super happy about. Once I was done with that shopping area, zooming out, I already was able to see that the Old Town and the shopping district look distinct. And I love that. Alright, next up is the Ringroad. We have no wall-to-wall buildings here, or definitely very few of them. Rather, I wanted to go for smaller apartments, duplexes, some row houses, that kind of thing. Now, in hindsight, doing the voiceover, I realized that I could have gone with a little more low-density commercial, like a few gas stations, a few like supermarkets, that kind of stuff, at random intersections, or, you know, areas that are a little out there and maybe a little more commercial or industrial focused. But we do have a few of these outlying areas already in the city. And, you know, maybe once I tackle these, we can do some of these transitional zones. Now, one thing that I tried to do here is whenever I placed a medium density building, like a 3x3 apartment is usually the size I went for, I tried and leave at least 1 square distance between the next zone or the next apartment, because that gives the medium density house or the apartment some breathing room, like visually and in real life as well. Like, you wouldn't have the windows from that apartment be right next to a single family home. So for example, in Germany, there is a law that mandates at least a 3-meter buffer on each lot, where you can't build anything besides a garage or a garden, but no like huge build-up structures. So if that is per lot, so for 2 adjacent lots, that would be 6 meters. And some of these apartments or some of these very small side streets that are like Old Town adjacent, basically, they don't have any on-street parking. And even in less built up areas, even in like more suburban areas, I've definitely seen small parking lots dotted here and there for apartments, for row houses, even for like single family homes where people can park. So again, whenever I had a spot that I had no idea what to fill it with, I would put either trees to cover it up and hide it, or put parking and make it somewhat functional. I would then set the parking to be free, because it's just like neighborhood parking and not downtown shopping parking or whatever, and basically force people in game to use that. And they do fill up nicely, and it makes the area look very alive. And especially on like a focal point such as that Ringroad, that is important, that saw a lot of change throughout the ages, but has always been that kind of important area. I wanted to have a huge variety of building styles. So that is one of the areas that has the highest variety. In the Old Town, it was shopping and wall-to-wall buildings and like some medieval buildings. For suburban areas, it's mostly single family homes or semi-detached houses, and you know, they would either be similar style-wise, like zone type-wise, or age-wise. They would have all been done in the 90s or the 70s, but for the Ringroad, basically everything goes. And that means we already have 3 distinct districts in our city and only a few more to go. And whenever I have buildings such as the old elementary school or the college, which even like in this case, the assets are historical and older looking buildings. I'm thinking, okay, how do I stray away from my like generic zoning toolkit? And in this case, for example, I would go with either just row houses, or surrounding the college, I would go with 1920s style apartments and villas. Now, one area that I struggle a bit with is Midtown. Basically, it's not the Old Town shopping street downtown area, and it's not the super diverse area surrounding the Ringroad, but it's basically the filler of everything in between. And that means more apartments, but at the same time, fewer mixed-use buildings. And we are still, on the other hand, not at the lower end of density that we would have in like the suburbs. So I was using a lot of semi-detached houses, a lot of row houses. And because I haven't really done a lot of cities with the vanilla zoning, because in all my other playthroughs, basically I plop every single building and go like hyper detailing. This is kind of like where I got really used to the systems. This was like in hour 3 or 4 of recording. This is a lot of raw footage that I had to go through. But this is where I got used to the systems, and I realized that with clever use of foliage, clever use of distance between buildings, and clever use of like lot sizes, I could achieve a lot. And I'm going to link a video here, which is one of my earliest like Cities Skylines realism guides that tackles exactly that. Compared to the Midtown, we are now focusing on a much more interesting area, which is the area surrounding the Riverside Park. So in this case, I went for more upscale apartments, large mansions. Another advantage is that by deleting a lot of our previously zoned buildings and then, rezoning and adding different buildings, we get rid of a lot of legacy issues that Cities Skylines 2 had at release. Basically, my city was at level 4 or 5 residential everywhere. There was a severe imbalance with building levels and education levels, and my population was completely skewed. Because we rezone a lot, we remove a lot of level 5, level 4 buildings, and, level 1 and level 2 buildings spawn again. And between patches, they changed the level calculation, they changed the requirements, they changed the land value calculations, they fixed bugs, all that kind of stuff. And the huge advantage here is, especially if you let the simulation run while building and while zoning, which I usually don't do, but you should, a lot of the issues in your city get fixed. The next area I'm tackling are these generic suburbs, which we have 2 of. One next to the riverside and one next to the station district. And a trick here is to check out focal points. As I mentioned earlier, schools, the college with the fancy apartments, that kind of stuff. And see if you can mix it up a bit and make your city look interesting there. For example, here, I wouldn't use the Dutch row houses because they're very distinct looking and they don't really fit the overall vibe of the city I'm going for historically and architecturally. But I have this one block here with a very new looking school, and I was like, there was a developer there, they put the school, they put a very specific style of buildings in a very specific epoch at that block. So it looks very homogeneous. And that is the one area where I went with the Dutch, I think it's called Gramble style buildings, or Gramble roof style buildings. And that is like that tiny area where the city looks a little different. And the rest of the blocks surrounding it are basically just suburbs. Lastly, let's tackle the train station district. The density here is supposed to be high. I want there to be wall-to-wall buildings on 2 main roads leading to the station. The one that goes directly straight at it, and then the one in parallel with the bike lanes heading towards the roundabout and then towards the downtown. But we gotta get some kind of density transition going, and I want to reduce the overall density ever so slightly, because I still think that for a city that size, like 4, 5, or in that case, I can already see a building with like 8 floors. That's too much. So we have to find some kind of middle ground here, while at the same time staying true to the overall feel, like the coherent density and architectural style of that district. One trick I used here is that I went with larger lot sizes for the lower density zone types. So for example, semi-detached buildings or the UK mixed residential, which are slightly smaller than the European and the German ones, but I still went with a larger lot size. And that means that the buildings are still somewhat large, but at the same time lower density, if that makes sense. And that allowed me to at least got like some density progression going, while still keeping the wall-to-wall high density feel of that area intact. So compared to the beginning, where I had to get used to the zoning system, for the station district, on the other hand, I had to get used to basically mixing all available zone types that I had, but in a coherent manner. So going all the way from single family houses and semi-detached ones to apartments to row houses to like medium to high density mixed use buildings. That was quite the challenge compared to like previous districts that were rezoned. I started this series in Cities Skylines 1, later recreated it in CS2, but the game and the assets were just not there yet. The city is finally in a state that I love for a vanilla playthrough. So let's expand it. Which areas do you want me to build next? Also, check out this video on how to make your city look realistic with no detailing.